Welcome to Video Narratives. We're doing a historical look at Anderson Township, and I am a part of that history. My name is John Larson. I'm pastor here at Salem Community Church, and I know a little bit about the history of this church, and I've been here long enough that I have created history at this church. So here's the story. The story goes back. This church was founded back in 1805 by Francis McCormick. Francis McCormick was an interesting guy. In fact, the Methodist revival was kind of a wild thing and spreading its roots all over. And he got a hold of some of that preaching. And one day it caught up with him. And he surrendered to it. And when he did, his father said, you know, this is not right. I'll give you the farm if you give up this Methodism stuff and just get out of it now. And he made a choice. He abandoned all of his inheritance, accepted not only Jesus, but a few years later got licensed to preach. And in 1805, he would uproot himself after about 8 years or so in Milford. And he would buy a plot of land here, 600 odd acres in the Anderson Township area. It was a military tract of land that he founded, and he would eventually buy it a few years after he started here. But he'd moved here in 1805, started the first church in his home, much like he did in Milford. That started also in his home. In this home, they gathered together. It was a little bit up there, close to Lewis Lane is where they would have their fellowship meetings. And a lot of the family members, many of them had traveled with him from Bourbon, Kentucky, some of them probably from the Milford area, to help plant these churches. I've read in one case, history said that he gave some land, that 600 acres, to the members of, the founding members of this church. Others say that they purchased the property. I'm not sure, but he kept 3/4 of an acre for himself, and he would eventually give another half an acre to the Anderson, what would later become the school district. A few years later, they grew. 1810, they were growing enough that they built a log frame cabin, which is just a little bit. It's out in the middle of where the cemetery is now. Of course, there wasn't a cemetery then. That was just property and locust trees. And so they built a 2-story log cabin. But I read that he not only held their Methodist Episcopal Church gatherings there, it eventually outgrew the log cabin. They had to build a bigger building. It was a brick building. And it's located, if you're looking at the church outside now, the old historic building, there's a wood frame on top of the stone foundation that existed for the brick building that used to be there. In 1828, they built the brick building, and we're not sure why it was eventually taken down, but they got started there in Anderson Township. There was a 5th schoolhouse to be put in the area, because again, that's community, that's what you do. Later on, that would get moved over. The brick building would be taken down. Again, history doesn't show why. I happen to have done a little, we were doing some work underneath the building. I happen to know some charred timbers underneath the frame building, which tells me that they probably had a coal fire in the building, and which disintegrates mortar, doesn't destroy brick. So my guess is they took the brick, easily chipped away the mortar, and then rebuilt a new brick building just to the east of where we are right now. And then that became the schoolhouse. This was originally, it was called McCormick Settlement. They also called it Salem Village. And he would stay here, and he would pastor the church for 31 years. He would eventually, he died in 1836. I have outlasted him. I beat him. I beat his records. One of the few things I can beat him at. But over the years, many of his members would end up getting buried there. Some of them are names that you're familiar with: Eversole, Mears. There's a few folks who did have streets named after them, who are buried here, who were members of the church. You can walk through and see a number of different names. I'm not sure exactly what the oldest stone is that we have in here. If you're coming to see Francis and his wife, their stones are out there. They're two very tall, probably the tallest, among the tallest stones in the cemetery. Hers being taller than his, rightfully so. Those that are pastors understand the wives usually deserve more of attention and celebration than us guys do. She has a huge stone out there. And again, their stones are located exactly where the 1810 log frame building used to be, their church building.